Good morning. My name is Roger Widmer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Collin Corporate College, and I'd like to just thank you all for attending today and welcome you to our webinar on the topic of COVID-19 and the impact that it's having on employee mental health. Before we get too far into our webinar, I want to give you an idea of what to expect. We will open with a few questions for Dr. Maxwell, our guest today. We will give him some time to provide advice to you as employers, but then we're also going to leave time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, for your questions. And so we would love for you to be sending your questions and submitting those to the chat so we can be ready for those at the end of the webinar. Also want to thank our sponsors, the original Pancake House of DFW and the Union Gospel Mission of Dallas, for making this all possible today. And again, we think this is a very timely and relevant topic, and hopefully will be very helpful for you. We were also joined and partnered with the area chambers of commerce, and I'd like to thank them for their partnership as well. So as I mentioned before, our special guest today is Dr. Michael Maxwell, and Dr. Maxwell has been involved in the area of mental health really for over 20 years and is a clinical psychologist as well as just a counselor educator, and has been involved with the faculty at a couple of the local universities. And we're very, very happy to have Dr. Maxwell join us today and to talk about this topic. So Dr. Maxwell, thank you. And I'm just going to jump right into some of the questions if I could. I think we would all agree that 2020 has changed the world. and although there have been several things that have been occurring, I think for the topic today, it's the pandemic. And so what are the issues? What are the things that people are dealing with that they haven't dealt? We hear the word unprecedented, right? We hear topics, we just haven't had to deal with this type of uncertainty before. So what are the issues that people are dealing with?
Well, thanks for that question. It's a very good question. I can certainly say that I've seen an uptick in my private practice over the past 6 months. That would surprise some folks. The areas that I've seen more clients than usual has been in the areas of depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse issues, domestic violence. What else? Also, we've seen an increase in areas of individuals who are diagnosed with major personality disorders, right? It's been 6 months, almost 6, 7 months now that we've been under these pandemic conditions. So now we've had enough time as clinicians and researchers to collect data. And so the States, China, and Spain have been on the forefront of doing this new research. And we've seen about a 50% increase in individuals who are reporting with depression, about a 40% of increase of individuals who are reporting more anxiety, a 34% increase of individuals who are reporting PTSD, and a 14% increase of individuals who are being diagnosed with major personality disorders, being histrionic disorder, borderline disorder, schizophrenia. It seems as if these pandemic conditions have now begun to stir up some sort of underlying resonant predispositions for some of these major personality disorders. And so for me, I've seen an increase in uptake in my business, but it shows that our society is really in a lot of pain. We're hurting. Right. And so it's having an impact on employees as well as employers because we're all under the same conditions.
So how do we're joined today on the webinar by C-suite executives, HR personnel. How do employers begin to prepare to help their employees if they haven't come back to work yet? They're coming back, let's say the first of the year, or maybe for some of those employers who are already back to work. What do they do to prepare for this or to help employees?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is to be compassionate and understanding that folks are going to be entering back into the workforce under a variety of different conditions, right? Some folks have been out of work completely for about 6 months or so. Some have had some maybe hybrid type of working conditions. A lot have been in front of the computer screen, doing a lot of Zoom meetings, and that has an impact as well. I think first is going to be an appreciation and understanding that folks have been greatly impacted by shelter in place, by pandemic anxiety, by the worries about family members who may have contracted or contracting it and passing it on to family members, about the future of jobs, about their job, about employment. And so first, I think it's going to be having a philosophical idea that folks were hurting and folks aren't going to be the same when they return. I like to think of it as, returning from a vacation that wasn't a vacation. Right. And so, sure, anytime we return, there's kind of a recalibration, a easing back into it. And I just think, first of all, employers, I believe, would be helpful for them and their employees to sense that my employer cares about my mental health. My employer has things in place not only to keep us physically safe with, cleaning products and PPE, but also has maybe new things or re-inviting things in place for dealing with mental health needs.
Sure. So it sounds like employers certainly need to provide support.
Right.
What about resources? How do employers connect employees who may be having some issues, may be dealing with some of these issues, with the resources, someone like yourself or other agencies to find help?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so, well, first, most larger corporations will have an HR department, and you'll have in place an EAP program, or through your insurance carrier, you'll have a pretty robust behavioral health or mental health program. I think of the stereotypical OSHA sign on the bulletin board. It's there out of obligation.
The posters, right?
Right, the posters. It's there out of obligation. It's not enough just to post something and say, oh, well, employees will see it and they'll know. I think employers need to go out of their way to ensure that employees know the steps for not only recognizing within themselves that I may be experiencing extra anxiety, or I may be showing some of the beginning signs of depression, or my substance intake has increased. I'm not here to be the police or the bad guy to cut that out. I may have a glass of wine with dinner tonight. I'm not going to have the entire bottle of wine, right? And so being able to recognize those areas, and feeling free to share that with your employer, and the employers not only having postings of what an employee can do, but having something in place that they can point out to the employees, these are the steps that I want you to take. I think most importantly is to have a heart for your employees, not as they come in, they produce for me, and they get a paycheck, so I've done my part, right? Individuals spend 8+ hours a day at the job. If there are 24 hours in the day, 8 of those hours are to be sleeping. That leaves 16. So half of your awake time is at a job. And so you have your work family.
Right.
And your supervisors, managers, the CEO, or whoever it may be, they're considered the parent types. And so if you were at home as a parent, you'd be on the lookout for your children's telltale signs. I've got 3 children of my own, teenagers and above. And whenever things started getting different, we began asking questions. Right. And so there's nothing wrong with an employer asking questions that they see a difference in behavior or attitude.
Well, let me ask about that, because there's a certain stigma, right, around mental health. People do not like to talk about this topic.
Right.
We have all kinds of defenses that we put up. We don't want to admit, right, that there may be something wrong. And recently, I think this story about Dak Prescott, who stepped forward and said, "Look, I've dealt with depression. I've dealt with some issues, and unfortunately, some actually came out in the media and suggested that in some way he was showing weakness by doing so." So, how do employers provide a safe zone? What is that brave zone? Whatever you want to call that. How do they do that in such a way that employees feel, I'm doing myself, I'm doing the right thing by telling my employer that I'm experiencing something and I'm doing the right thing for me?
That's a fantastic question, and I'll get to the answer to that question. I wanted to first address this issue of the stigma, and it's very real. It's the elephant in the room. It's very unfortunate in our society that we have such a horrible stigma on individuals who seek out mental health services. And I'd like to maybe one day get to a point to where we could view it the same as, dentistry, right? In your insurance plan, you get your 2 cleanings and checkups. No one bats an eye at saying, I'm going to the dentist today. But if you're going to see your mental health provider, it's very hush-hush, right? It's like, your bank account balance. You don't want anyone to know what your bank account balance is because it's that personal to you. But unfortunately, in our society, the overwhelming sort of energy is, well, folks who seek out mental health, either something major wrong with them, or they're weak, or they're not capable of taking care of their own mental health issues. So therefore, we got to keep that on the down low. Okay? What employers can do is exactly what Dak did and what Jay-Z did several years ago with announcing that I see a counselor with Eminem. And again, I'm sharing these very popular figures and what we saw as mental health providers is a real nice flow upward for individuals seeking out, right? So those are celebrities. What employers can do is they can invite employees to talk about mental health issues and to reassure them that there are no negative consequences. I think a lot of employees fear that if they share that type of information with an employer, it'll go into a permanent record, they may be chastised, or it may hinder them from being invited for promotion or a raise. And so it's society's issue and it's society's thing to try and correct for. But what employers can do, they can be very robust and very outward about inviting, but at the same time role modeling for their employees that, hey, this is something I do, very similar to the DAC thing. The DAC thing is it was great, then it became unfortunate, and it became great again, right? So DAC was very, very open about the idea that he felt depressed and he wasn't willing to work out, and I loved it.
Right.
I loved hearing that openness and that vulnerability, because for someone that's in such a high regard as a public figure, that was awesome. And then Skip Bayless, I'll call him out because it was very clear, who was supposed a super Cowboys fan, chastised Dak for making that announcement, showing it because he thought it was a show of weakness. And I think I know where Skip was coming from. I don't want to psychoanalyze Skip, but the idea that someone who is going to lead men, right? We can't imagine General Patton talking about depression, right? So someone's going to lead men to talk about these emotional things. Well, the men that he's leading aren't going to see him as a leader, right? But that was not what we saw, right? As a matter of fact, this past Sunday, after the Cowboys game, the tight end for the Falcons, after the game, ran in to seek out Dak, and he said, man, thank you for what you did. I've got this, my mom and I are doing this thing that I'd love you to be a part of. And so we've seen this up and down flow. The world's going to have folks like Skip who are going to see the flaw in being open and vulnerable and talking about some of these areas that someone might consider weakness, but it's a strength. Right. It's a strength to say, hey, I'm human. First of all, I'm human, and I'm not my best right now.
Right. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go back to something you mentioned earlier, and that is, a lot of people have been working from home. Mm-hmm. So they're working from home. They've got the same stress, right? They may be working in their pajamas, but it's still the same expectations for productivity, and they also have their children at home.
Yes.
In some cases, right? They're also homeschooling their children. Mm-hmm. So any suggestions you have for the employee that may be, juggling that, but also any suggestions you might have for the employer who understands that, maybe their employee is being torn in a couple of directions that they aren't torn if they're, at the office. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And that's a tough one. It really is a tough one. This, as you've mentioned before, these are unprecedented times. And I think it's going to require that employees and employers are willing to work together to come up with a solution, because, employers, keeping their businesses alive is important to them, but their employees are the life force or the blood force of the workforce. And so it's difficult for parents to have their children at home, being charged with the onus of homeschooling their children, working a full-time job, perhaps in front of the computer with their children, and then in front of the computer with their job, maybe doing some back and forth hybrid type of work. I think from a parent/employee standpoint, I have 3 ideas. One is, first of all, listen to your body and pay attention and take heed, right? The human body can only take so much. And so listen to your body and engage in regular and intentional self-care. That's one. Two, tag team the thing. Get help from your spouse who may not be willing, from neighbors, family members, friends. Create this co-op of service providers. Say, you know what, I'm going to send the kids over here for homeschooling for today. Send them over to me on Tuesday because my employer, which is my third point, my employer is being flexible with my time and allowing me to do a half day on Tuesdays, right? So that I can do the homeschooling. So be willing to, and it goes right back to this idea of sharing your vulnerabilities, sharing your needs, being okay with saying, I need help, right? So utilize the resources you have at your disposal. And the third point, which I've already insinuated on, is employers being willing to be flexible with their employees, particularly the ones who are charged with homeschooling their children, and offering, off-beat times or some work at home and some work in the office, but being willing to look at that and work with your employees.
Right. So obviously, Collin Corporate College, we're involved in training, corporate training, customized training. We've heard from a lot of employers and employees that they're taking advantage of this time to do some upskilling, to do some training. What are your thoughts on training on this actual topic?
Yes. Upskilling is a very, very important part of any business model. I mean, not only does it train your employees to be a better fit for the job, but it also, what the research has shown, it actually boosts morale. It boosts morale amongst employees who are engaged in upskilling because they have faith in their employer that my employer sees enough in me that he or she would like to elevate my skills, right? So I'm not a fan of eliminating upskilling altogether, but we need to be more creative in what skill do we want our employees to pick up on now.
That's good.
And of course, I'm biased. I'm a mental health provider.
Right.
I think this is a perfect and great time to consider upskilling in the area of recognizing your own body, recognizing your own mental health needs, being able to recognize in your family and or coworkers when something is different. Just this telltale signs for something needs to be attended to, right? The body always keeps score, right? We may want to sweep it under the rug, but after a while, you're gonna have a big lump under the rug. The body keeps score. And after a while, sometimes we could engage in behaviors that will create some non-repairable damage. The research is strong in synapses and dendrite damage that is irreparable. Ulcers, yeah, you can get some medication and sometimes back off of whatever the stress-inducing stimuli are, but some of the neurological stuff can't be repaired. So you have to listen to your body. So I would say the upskilling sort of mode of 2020 and 2021 could be, let's train our employees on how to best recognize these signs so that we can be proactive versus reactive.
Great. Well, as I mentioned before, I want to save some time at the end for questions that our viewers are sending in today. But can you just take a few minutes and just, what general advice, just anything general advice you might give for the employers that are watching today?
Okay. Employees first and employers, because we're all experiencing this same phenomenon. This is very unprecedented. This global pandemic and not only the medical and physiological ramifications of COVID, but also the mental health and psychological ramifications. And I think it's important to involve yourself, like I mentioned before, in regular and intentional self-care. Right? I think about when you're on the plane and you're getting instructions on if something happens and the masks come down and you're caring for a child, right? Oxygenate yourself before oxygenating your child, because a passed out parent is no good for a child that's in need. And so whenever I mention self-care, a lot of folks have a knee-jerk reaction. They're like, well, you're asking me to be selfish. And I would argue that that's the opposite, right? You're being selfless in that I can be a better version of me for my family, for my employer, if I'm taking care of business beforehand. And so having intentional and regular self-care activities, good, healthy nutrition, ample rest and sleep, recreation that's meaningful for you, and it's regular and intentional. And what that does, that creates a sort of insulation, We can't keep pandemics from happening. I like to equate it to the common cold. We don't have a cure for the common cold. You go to the doctor, your doctor may prescribe something to help provide some comfort from the symptoms, right? But there's no cure. And we can't keep the bugs and the germs that are going to create the common cold from entering into your body. What we can do is we can have a regular regimen of vitamins, i.e. vitamin C. Vitamin C does not cure common cold. What vitamin C can do, it can help fortify the system, the immune system, so that whenever the bugs enter your body, your cold is not going to have as much intensity or duration. So you may have the sniffles for a day or two versus being totally wiped out for an entire week. And so, but what you can't do is start pumping the vitamin C in when you begin to feel the sniffles. It's too late. And so regular and intentional routine self-care, so that when something like this does happen, and I hope we don't have another pandemic in my lifetime, but if something like this does happen, we are insulated and ready for it. Because what the research has also shown, that individuals who have a high tolerance for ambiguity, a high tolerance for stress, have handled these pandemic conditions better than those who weren't ready for it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope our viewers have found that helpful. So we have some time now to entertain some questions, and I'll just lead with the first one that we've received, and that is, we've worked together for 10 years. I know you pretty well. I know your routine. I know your kind of your personality. What are the early warning signs? What are the warning signs that an employer or a coworker even might want to look for? What are the ethical issues related to me coming to HR and saying, hey, my desk mate doesn't seem to be the same. There's something going on. Can you talk about?
Sure. And I think the wording you just used is perfect. We have eyes. And as you've mentioned here, when you've known someone long enough and you have an idea of what their personality is like and what their work routine is like, and you see a difference, there's nothing wrong with bringing it to someone's attention, sharing your observations. I would say first, I would suggest engaging in adulting, right? Directly speak with your coworker and say, hey, I'm noticing some differences. I've known you for a while and you're a little bit more irritable. You're coming in a little later than usual. You're not taking your lunch break, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say first, bring up to your coworker's attention and ask, is there anything going on? And if you're still seeing the same type of behavior or an elevation of behavior, there's nothing unethical about bringing it to the attention of HR and saying, I'm seeing a difference in my coworker. You're not diagnosing anyone. You're not calling anything out. You're just sharing your observations, right? And so I think that those two steps are really, really important with being a caretaker for one another.
So next question, I know this is a little tricky because we can't give diagnostic information through a webinar, right? But the question is, as an employee, how do I know if what I'm experiencing is actually, something that needs to be, that I need to seek attention for?
You won't, right? First of all, like I'd mentioned before, listen to your body. You know your body better than anyone else. Listen to your body. And just if it were you had a stomach ache, you would go to your primary care physician and say, hey, I've got these symptoms. Can we check it out? If you have a headache that won't go away, you do the same thing. If you hurt your leg, you do the same thing. And so if you are recognizing differences in your body and it's having an impact on your life and or your work productivity, then go to your primary care physician. And if you have a good one and it's psychologically sort of driven, then that primary care physician will maybe suggest that you see a mental health professional, right? So I think it's a matter of just knowing your body, knowing what your limits are, and if you feel as if that you're kind of not the same, going in to speak to any professional and then receive a referral. Okay,
great. Next question came in around this concept that you discussed earlier, kind of this Zoom fatigue, right? So, I mean, as humans, we need community. We need to connect. We need to be together. We're social beings, right? So, Any suggestions in terms of, we've been in quarantine, we've been home for long periods of time, and we're tired of doing things through technology. We want to be together, right? Any suggestions? I think the question is asking, how do we deal with the Zoom fatigue?
Okay. Well, you're right. We have a variety of personality types, and we think about the proverbial introvert and extrovert. But you're right. We all need some level of social interaction. It's just part of being human. Your most introverted introvert needs some, and certainly your extroverts need more, just for feeling re-energized and just feeling part of what's happening. And so Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. It's highly research-based. Lots of validity, lots of reliability. Sorry about that. And yeah, I mean, sitting in front of a screen, involved in meetings for extended amounts of time does have an impact on us. When you think about all the different stimuli that's coming at you and what you're asking your brain to do during these Zoom meetings, and if you're in a face-to-face meeting around a conference table, it's very different. But in a Zoom meeting, it's hard to read body language. So now your brain is going in overload saying, I wonder what the intent to that is. You've got these screens that are moving and popping up. It's like a video game, right? And children who are engaged in video games for too long, well, they have ramifications as well. And so it's very real. The suggestion I would have is to, at your very best, limit your Zoom meetings. For employers, quality over quantity. Make certain that you're strongly recommending that between meetings that your employees get away from the computer, take real breaks, go for a little walk, do some stretching, get a drink of water, but don't just sit there and wait for the next meeting. Another suggestion is don't multitask during Zoom meetings, right? You're already asking your brain to engage in a behavior that it's not used to. And so to multitask while a Zoom meeting is happening is only going to further exacerbate the problem. And so, first of all, it's acceptance. It's real. Zoom fatigue is real. Some folks, I know that a lot of folks that came to see me were really for the idea of, oh, I get to work from home now. But it took a couple of weeks to say, I'm ready to get back to the office because I'm more tired now than I was whenever I was in the office. So accepting it, knowing the signs, and doing the small little things that you can to mitigate it.
Very good. Well, thank you all for your questions that you've submitted. I want to be sensitive to our time. I want to thank Dr. Maxwell for being here today and for, I think, very helpful information. And I'll let you know that if you're interested in hearing more from Dr. Maxwell, if you're interested in him conducting a training for you, you can reach us through the Collin Corporate College. You can reach out to Jana Nixon. Probably the easiest way to reach her is her email is jnixon@collin.edu, but we would love to hear from you if you're interested in some additional training or thoughts from Dr. Maxwell. Would again like to thank our sponsors and thank the original Pancake House of DFW, the Union Gospel Mission of Dallas. I'd like to thank again the area chambers of commerce that partnered with us to make this possible. And again, just thank you for being with us today. Hope you found it helpful.